What killed our price, the record shop that defined British music culture for an entire generation? Every Saturday morning in the 1980s, thousands of teenagers made the same pilgrimage to those iconic red and white storefronts where staff actually knew their Smiths from their Stone Roses, where you could spend hours in a listening booth deciding if that new album was worth 2 weeks of pocket money, where walking out with a red carrier bag made you feel like you belonged to something bigger. Yet within 20 years, every single one of those 300-plus stores vanished, taking with them an entire culture of music discovery that streaming services have never quite managed to replicate. In 1971, Gary Nesbitt, Edward Stollins and Mike Isaacs did something radical on Finchley Road in North London. They opened a record shop that actually gave a damn about music. This wasn't some corporate venture run by suits who thought the Beatles were still together. The first 6 stores were actually branded as The Tape Revolution, selling compact cassettes and 8-track tapes before rebranding to Our Price Records in 1976, when vinyl demand exploded. Our Price was built on a simple but revolutionary premise. What if record shops were run by people who actually loved music? And what if they sold albums at prices ordinary people could afford? Before Our Price, buying records in Britain was a bit of a con. Most high street shops treated vinyl like washing machines, with staff who couldn't tell you the difference between Mark Bolan and a broom handle. They'd charge whatever they fancied. Our Price flipped this entire model on its head. The concept was beautifully straightforward. Discount records sold by actual music enthusiasts. No middle-aged managers who thought rock and roll was a passing fad. Just proper music fans selling music to other music fans at prices that meant working-class teenagers could actually afford to build a collection. That distinctive red and white branding became synonymous with youth culture almost immediately. It was bold, bright, and screamed, "We're different," from the stuffy brown and beige record departments in department stores. What made Our Price genuinely revolutionary was the democratization of music. Before they came along, a new album could cost the equivalent of a day's wages for many young people. Our Price's discount model meant that kids saving up lunch money could actually walk out with the new Clash album. They made music accessible in a way it simply hadn't been before, helping create the soundtrack to an entire generation's youth. The staff were the secret weapon. These weren't Saturday job merchants counting down until closing time. These were obsessives who could spend 20 minutes explaining why you absolutely had to listen to this obscure B-side, who'd argue passionately about whether punk was really dead, who'd stake their reputation on recommending an album you'd never heard of. They were curators, educators and evangelists rolled into one, making every visit feel like being let into a secret club. We'll be revealing soon the shocking corporate decisions that ultimately destroyed these stores. The story of how supermarkets and corporate greed killed music retail is going to make your blood boil. By the early 1980s, Our Price had achieved something remarkable. They'd turned record shopping into a national ritual. Every Saturday morning across Britain, the same scene played out. Teenagers would wake up early, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, counting out pocket money earned from paper rounds or Saturday jobs, heading straight to the high street. First stop, Our Price. The expansion was explosive. By the mid-1980s, you couldn't walk down a British high street without seeing those red storefronts. Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Glasgow, even small towns suddenly had an Our Price. It became as fundamental to the British high street as Woolworths or Boots, except infinitely cooler. Walking into Our Price on a Saturday morning was like entering a temple dedicated to music. The smell hit you first, that distinctive combination of new vinyl, plastic CD cases, and teenage excitement. The walls were plastered with band posters, the sound system always playing something current and cool. The listening booths were revolutionary. In an era before Spotify previews or YouTube, Our Price gave you the power to actually hear an album before buying it. You'd take the record to the counter, they'd hand you headphones, and you'd stand in your booth, transported. Sometimes you'd emerge convinced you needed this album immediately. Sometimes you'd try something else. The point was, you had agency. Staff picks were taken seriously, almost religiously. Handwritten cards with the staff member's name attached, putting their reputation on the line. If you like The Cure's Disintegration, you'll love this wasn't corporate marketing. It was Gary from the Saturday Shift genuinely thinking you'd enjoy something. And when Gary was right, which he usually was, you'd come back next week specifically to see what else he recommended. The chart countdown displays created genuine weekly excitement. This wasn't some abstract chart you'd read about in a magazine. This was right there in your local shop, showing you exactly what was number one this week. Watching your favourite band climb the charts, seeing that new entry sticker appear, it mattered in a way that Spotify's algorithmic playlists will never replicate. Our Price became more than a shop. It became a social hub. You'd run into mates browsing the racks, strike up conversations with strangers about whether Marillion were actually any good, overhear staff debates about the Smiths versus the Stone Roses. In pre-internet Britain, these physical spaces were precious. This was where scenes formed, where you learned about gigs, where you discovered other people shared your taste in music. Spending hours in Our Price wasn't weird, it was normal. You could arrive at 11 and still be there at 2, having examined every new release, flipped through the bargain bins, debated purchases with yourself. Because buying an album was a commitment. You were spending serious money, and you'd live with this decision for months. You needed to be sure. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Our Price had achieved something close to total domination of British music retail. Over 300 stores from Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands, and red and white empire that had become as British as queuing. The competition was fierce, but Our Price had something none of them could quite replicate. They were everywhere, they were affordable, and crucially, they felt like they belonged to you rather than to shareholders. HMV had their classical heritage and upmarket positioning. Virgin Megastore went for massive flagship experiences. Tower Records brought American-style enormity to London, but Our Price was the people's choice. Then came the CD revolution. The early 1990s saw millions of Britons systematically replacing their vinyl collections with compact discs, convinced by promises of superior sound quality and indestructibility. Whether either was true remains debatable, but people believed it. And they bought everything twice. That worn copy of Dark Side of the Moon you'd owned since 1973? Time for the CD upgrade. The profit margins were astronomical, and Our Price printed money. In-store appearances became regular events. Blur or Oasis showing up at your local Our Price wasn't unthinkable, it happened regularly. These weren't stadium acts deigning to visit the commoners. These were artists who understood that Our Price was crucial to their success. That red carrier bag became a badge of cool, a statement that you cared about music and were culturally engaged. Our Price genuinely shaped British music taste during this period. What they stocked, what they promoted, what their staff recommended, these decisions rippled outward. A big Our Price push could make a band. They were gatekeepers who generally had their hearts in the right place, championing good music rather than just shifting units. 1986. While Wham were saying their farewell and the Chernobyl disaster dominated headlines, W.H. Smith, the stationery and magazine retailer, bought a 75% controlling share in Our Price. On paper, it probably seemed logical. W.H.S. Smith already sold some music, Our Price was the music retail specialist, synergies would be achieved, shareholders would be happy. In reality, it was the beginning of the end. Corporate takeovers always promise they won't change what made the acquisition valuable, and they always lie. W.H.S. Smith didn't understand Our Price. They saw a retail operation that sold products, not a cultural institution that sold experiences. They looked at those passionate music fans working in stores and saw expensive staff who could be replaced with cheaper, less knowledgeable workers. They examined the business model and decided it needed optimizing, which in corporate speak means sucking the soul out of it. Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, they all decided that CDs would make excellent loss leaders. They'd sell the latest albums at cost or below, taking a loss because people buying that new Oasis album would also grab bread and milk. The supermarkets could absorb these losses. Specialist retailers like Our Price couldn't compete. Suddenly, What's the Story Morning Glory cost £9.99 at Our Price or £7.99 at Tesco while doing your weekly shop. Never mind that Tesco's music section was a soulless afterthought staffed by teenagers who knew nothing about music. Never mind browsing between frozen peas and washing powder lacked romance. It was cheaper, and in the price-conscious 1990s, cheaper won. Then came the internet. Amazon launched in 1994, quickly expanding into music. Here was unlimited selection, discounted prices, and delivery to your door. You lost the social experience and expert recommendations, but you gained choice and convenience. For customers outside major cities, this was revelatory. In March 1994, W.H. Smith made another strategic move. They bought a majority interest in Richard Branson's Virgin retail chain, the smaller Virgin shops rather than the flagship megastores. The two brands were merged to create Virgin Our Price. Initially, this seemed like a masterstroke, pushing them ahead of HMV in market share. Virgin Our Price even increased profits by 10% in the first year. By 1997, sales had dropped 3% across the industry, and W.H. Smith was bleeding money. In 1998, they cut their losses and sold the entire operation back to Virgin for £145 million. The Our Price brand survived this transfer, but its days were numbered. But the real apocalypse was brewing in dorm rooms and bedrooms. File sharing. Napster launched in June 1999, and suddenly music became free. Why pay £12.99 for an album when you could download it in 20 minutes? The music industry responded with lawsuits and moral outrage, but the genie was out of the bottle. A generation discovered they could have unlimited music for nothing, and record shops, already wounded, started bleeding out. Here's where things get properly dark, where we see how corporate takeovers and supermarket cynicism destroyed not just Our Price, but an entire culture of music retail. In August 2000, Virgin announced they'd be dropping the Our Price name from over 100 stores, rebranding them as V-Shop. Their commercial director told Billboard that Our Price was just too parochial a brand that epitomized the high street record store of the 80s. Brutal but honest. V-Shops concentrated on VHS tapes, DVDs and Virgin Mobile products alongside popular CDs, removing most back catalogue. They installed computer terminals for ordering obscure albums for home delivery, a primitive attempt at combining physical retail with internet shopping. It failed. Virgin continued converting Our Price stores throughout 2001, while closing another 30 unprofitable locations. In October 2001, Virgin sold the remaining 77 Our Price branded stores to Brazen Limited, an Australian entertainment retailer, for the princely sum of £2. Yes, £2. The entire chain sold for less than the cost of a pint. Those stores struggled on under various ownership until 2004, when they finally closed for good. Meanwhile, Apple had been busy. The iTunes Store launched in America in April 2003, reaching Britain in June 2004. This was different from Napster. It was legal, easy, and cheap. 79 pence per song, around £8 for most albums. No dodgy downloads, no viruses, no guilt. Just click, pay, and the music was yours, instantly, digitally. For the few remaining traditional music retailers, iTunes was a death sentence delivered with sleek efficiency. Why travel to a shop, browse limited stock, queue, and carry something home when you could have any song immediately? Convenience was irresistible. The physical experience became irrelevant. The final Our Price stores that limped on until 2004 were sad. Diminished spaces with reduced stock, disinterested staff, and dwindling customers. The people shopping there were mostly older music fans clinging to physical media, or people without internet access. The teenagers who'd been the lifeblood of record retail had moved online. But the cruelest twist wasn't the closure itself, it was how Virgin so publicly humiliated Our Price's brand before finally killing it off for good. What killed Our Price? Everything, all at once. Streaming and digital downloads destroyed the need for physical media. Supermarket discounting made specialist retailers uncompetitive. Corporate mismanagement killed the culture that made Our Price special. Amazon offered unlimited choice without leaving your house. File sharing taught a generation music could be free. Each factor was damaging, together fatal. But there's something deeper lost here, something harder to quantify. Music became data, albums became playlists, the physical experience of ownership, the ritual of purchase, the community of fellow fans, the guidance of knowledgeable staff, all evaporated into the cloud. You gained convenience and choice, but you lost something ineffable. The cultural loss is significant. Spotify's algorithm might suggest songs you'll like, but it'll never have Gary from Our Price's passion, staking his reputation on a recommendation. You can stream millions of songs instantly, but you'll never have the anticipation of saving for weeks to buy one album. You can share playlists, but you'll never have the physical badge of cool that was walking around with a red Our Price bag. Record shops were physical spaces where music culture happened, where scenes formed, where you learned about gigs, where you discovered that other people shared your obsessive love of music. When they disappeared, that sense of physical music community largely disappeared with them. What remains today? Memories, mostly. Middle-aged Britons remember Saturday mornings at Our Price, the distinctive smell of a record shop, the weight of an album in your hands, the excitement of New Release Friday, the satisfaction of building a collection shelf by shelf. There's peculiar nostalgia for the limitations of the past. Saving up for an album meant you listened properly, repeatedly, learning every track. Limited access meant you treasured what you had. Physically going somewhere to buy music made it an event, not background noise. Some independent record shops survive, specializing in vinyl, serving a niche market of enthusiasts rather than the mass audience Our Price commanded. They're wonderful spaces, but they're not the cultural force. Our Price was at its peak. The red and white branding occasionally surfaces in online nostalgia posts accompanied by memories of first album purchases, in-store appearances, Saturday mornings browsing with friends. These memories are remarkably vivid and similar, suggesting Our Price genuinely created a shared cultural experience for an entire generation. Perhaps the most significant legacy is what Our Price proved was possible: that music retail could be democratic, accessible, and culturally significant simultaneously. That commerce and passion weren't mutually exclusive. For 3 decades, those red and white shops were proof that business could have soul. The death of Our Price represents more than one company's failure. It represents the end of an entire era when buying an album was a deliberate act, when music fans gathered in physical spaces, when expertise mattered. We've gained unprecedented access to music, but we've lost the ritual, the community, the experience. Would you trade Spotify's 40 million songs for the way music felt when you had to work for it? Probably not, if we're honest. Convenience is seductive. But sometimes late at night, scrolling through endless playlists without settling on anything, you might wonder if we gave up something valuable for something merely useful. Our Price is gone. Those red shops will never return. The Saturday morning ritual belongs to history now, alongside phone boxes and Blockbuster. But the memories remain, surprisingly powerful, surprisingly detailed, of when buying music was an event, not a click. Of when record shops felt real. If this video transported you back to those Saturday mornings at Our Price, if you remember the smell of a record shop and the weight of an album in your hands, do me a favour, subscribe to this channel. We're diving deep into the British institutions that shaped our culture and then vanished, the high street legends we took for granted until they were gone. Rumble Lows, BHS and more. Hit that subscribe button because next week we're talking about another icon of British youth culture that technology killed. And if you've got memories of Our Price, share them in the comments. Let's keep that red and white legacy alive, at least in our memories, because that's all we have left now.